And we're just going to get started. Now, we're reading this book, Charles S. Longacre, Champion of Religious Liberty. He was working during the early 1900s. And when we left off, he was working with the Congress people in the Pennsylvania State Congress to oppose Sunday law legislation that had been on the books since maybe the 1700s. And of course, there was a strong Christian push to keep that legislation on the books and to enforce the observance of Sunday sacredness, in a sense, by restricting the activities people in the state could do. And we call those Sunday blue laws. But Longacre had been working with the legislative people for several years to help open their eyes about this concept of legislating religion. And that's where we kind of left off. He was going to be called into the legislature to lead those few people who were against these Sunday laws. And we're going to pick up now where we left off last time. A bill was being presented to Congress, state Congress, about enforcing, no, I think it might have been about loosening these laws on the legislature. But let's go on. Before the hearings were held, he, i.e. Longacre, had sent Liberty magazine for 2 years to all the clergymen in Pennsylvania. The magazine had contained articles that analyzed the bill pending before the state legislature and recounted the persecutions carried on under the laws of 1794. As a result of reading these articles, more than a dozen clergymen of different groups offered to come to Harrisburg to speak in favor of the referendum, and he asked them to come to Harrisburg for a caucus meeting with Mr. Schwartz. Mr. Schwartz was the legislature that was introducing this bill before the state legislatures. Just prior to the time the hearings before the Committee of Law and Order of the House of Representatives were to be held. At this first meeting, 8 clergymen came to speak in favor of the referendum. Longacre advised them that their opponents had summoned a number of clergymen of the same denominations to speak in opposition to the bill, and that these ministers would tell the legislatures that if they voted to repeal the Sunday laws of Pennsylvania, they were virtually repealing the 4th commandment of the Decalogue. Now, that was their argument to keep these laws on the books, because if they repealed them, they were actually repealing or going contrary to the 4th commandment of the Decalogue. Furthermore, he reminded these men that the 4th commandment of the Decalogue designated the observance of the 7th day and not the first day of the week as the Sabbath. They all admitted that this was the truth. Then he suggested, this is at this caucus, that it would come with better grace to have them answer which day of the week was set forth in the Decalogue as the Sabbath day. They all agreed that they would answer and would inform the legislature that they were not repealing the 4th commandment when they repealed the Sunday laws. The Lord's Day Alliance and the National Reform Association had summoned a strong array of political preachers who advocated that the civil magistrate had the right to enforce religious obligations and that legislatures of the state had a perfect right to enact religious laws in defense of religion. Otherwise, Christianity would perish from the earth. At the conclusion of a vigorous fight before the committee in a room packed with representatives of the House and members of the Senate, Longacre was requested by the chairman of the committee to attend its executive session. There he was asked why some clergymen stated that the legislators would be guilty of repealing the fourth commandment of the Decalogue if they voted to repeal the Sunday laws, and therefore were answerable to God for repealing his own laws. When other clergymen asserted with the same earnestness that the fourth commandment was not going to be affected if the Sunday laws were repealed. Elder Longacre asked the committee members whether they really wanted to know the truth as to which day of the week was set forth in the Decalogue as a holy day and was commanded by God to be observed. They said they would like to have the proof, since the clergymen did not agree on this point. So Longacre opened his Bible and told the committee members that he was going to read the fourth commandment as written by God himself on tables of stone. He then read the commandment from Exodus 20. After he had finished reading, an unusual solemnity came over the members of the committee. They voted immediately to report the bill favorably for passage by the House of Representatives. The bill was speedily passed by the House and then referred to the Senate. Hearings were held on the bill in the Senate chamber, and again he summoned the clergymen who were in favor of the bill to come to the hearings. This time, a dozen responded and spoke in favor of the popular referendum and the right of the people to express their wishes at the polls at the forthcoming November election. Just before the hearing took place in the packed Senate chamber, the superintendent of the National Reform Association, the superintendent of the Pennsylvania Sabbath Association, and the secretary of the Lord's Day Alliance of Pennsylvania met Elder Longacre and said they were going to prove to the Senate committee that he, Longacre, was allied with corrupt liquor barons, gamblers, and dens of vice. He replied that he was going to show them that he was linked with the leading clergymen and moral forces of Pennsylvania. When he introduced 12 of the leading clergymen as speakers in favor of the bill, and this is a bill, I may not have made it clear at the beginning, a bill that was being introduced that the people were to vote on, whether they could choose to have Sunday ball games, for example, or baseball or football games, that this was a choice of the people. They had this choice and they wanted people to vote for it. And so this was the reason for the discussion. When he introduced 12 of the leading clergymen as speakers in favor of this bill, the superintendent of the National Reform Association, who had made the foregoing sinister statement, fairly pulled his hair as he ran his fingers through his locks and paced up and down in front of the committee members. He was a Presbyterian, and there were two Presbyterian ministers, one from Pittsburgh and the other from Harrisburg, who spoke in favor of Sunday baseball and football. 10 other clergymen spoke that night in favor of the referendum, including ministers of the Lutheran, Baptist, and Episcopal churches, and Dr. Samuel Hardin Church, president of the Carnegie Institute of Pittsburgh. The opponents of the bill summoned more than a score of clergymen to speak in opposition of the bill. At the conclusion of the hearings, the committee reported the bill out of committee for favorable action by the Senate. In other words, they pushed it on. When it came time for final action by the Senate, the clergymen who were opposed to the bill were standing in the rear, in the aisles, and in front of the hall, jotting down with pencil on paper the name of each voter and how he voted, as an attempt to intimidate him if he did not vote to their liking. They had done the same in the House, but their threat no longer had any power over the lawmakers. The Senate passed the bill and sent it to the governor to be signed. Then the real fight began. A hearing was arranged before the governor in the large caucus room adjoining his office in the Capitol building. He had stated that he had not yet made up his mind whether he would sign or veto the bill. The opposition, however, was very confident that he would veto it. Because of his action in another case involving a father of a family of children who went fishing on Sunday near Philadelphia on the Delaware River to supply food for his hungry family, and was shot by a game warden for violating the law against fishing on Sunday. As a result of this incident, the Pennsylvania legislature voted to repeal the law in respect to fishing on Sunday, but the governor vetoed the bill on the ground that Sunday fishing was contrary to custom in Pennsylvania. The Lord's Day Alliance and the Pennsylvania Sabbath Association had summoned 150 preachers to attend the conclave with the governor in the large caucus room, urging him to veto the Schwartz bill. Moreover, the officers of 22 major organizations appeared in opposition to the bill. Letters and telegrams by the thousands poured in, urging a veto. At the caucus meeting with the opposing clergymen, held April 25, the governor promised that he would veto the bill. In exultation, the opponents of the bill marched out of the caucus chamber to make room for those who favored the bill to enter and argue their case before the governor. As the clergymen marched out, Dr. Mulcher of the Philadelphia Sabbath Association placed his hand on Longacre's shoulder. "You are with the wrong crowd," he said. "You should have been with us." Now, for those who may not understand, the Sabbath Association was really a Sunday association. They called Sunday Sabbath. It's not like the Seventh-day Sabbath. So, Dr. Mulcher of the Philadelphia Sabbath Association placed his hand on Longacre's shoulder. "You are with the wrong crowd," he said. "You should have been with us, instead of this godless amusement crowd. May God have mercy on your soul." Elder Longacre stopped just long enough to say, "If you were seated upon the judgment throne in the last day to judge me, I would have occasion to be fearful. But I am not afraid to meet my God in that day and give account of my actions today." The delegation favoring the bill appointed Elder Longacre to be their chief spokesman. Hello, is that Miss Spencer?
Yes, good evening. Good evening to everyone.
Okay, we're glad you're with us, Miss Spencer. I'm in the middle of reading this story. I hope you'll enjoy it.
Thank you.
Okay. And where were we? Let's see. The delegation favoring the bill appointed Elder Longacre to be their chief spokesman. Louis Schwartz, the author of the bill, and William Roper, a councilman of Philadelphia and a former coach of the Princeton University football team, also spoke. Longacre was given the honor of making the opening speech because he was personally acquainted with the governor. He had twice introduced him at national conventions of the Anti-Saloon League of America. As he shook hands with the governor, he handed him 75 telegrams from people of the Jewish, Catholic, and Protestant faiths, requesting him to sign the bill, thus letting the people of Pennsylvania decide the issue. The governor was evidently taken by surprise. He said, "How is this? There were about 150 clergymen in this room just a few minutes ago, and they asked me to veto this bill, and I promised them I would." Elder Longacre told the governor that he should have waited until he had heard the other side of the question before making such a promise. He admitted, and welcome, Andrew, for joining us. He admitted that that would have been a far wiser course to follow, but insisted that he was going to have an open mind and might still change his opinion, provided those who favored his signing the bill gave him good reason to do so. Elder Longacre said that he was in full agreement with him that the evils of the liquor traffic should be eliminated as far as possible, but that he was not in favor of turning the religious beliefs of certain religious groups into law and have civil magistrates enforce those religious beliefs under duress of the civil authorities. He took the opportunity to emphasize the fact that such laws had always led to religious persecution of dissenting sects and a legal discrimination against such sects. He reminded the governor that the clergyman who got him to promise the veto told the legislators at the hearings that the majority of the citizens of Pennsylvania were opposed to the bill. "That is what they told me," the governor said. "Well," Longacre replied, "if they are telling the truth, then they have nothing to fear as to the outcome of the elections. Why not test out the results by letting the people decide this matter themselves? You, Governor, have all your lifetime advocated popular government. That is, government by the people, for the people. Your motto has been, 'Let the people rule.' Now, are you going to make yourself a dictator by deciding this issue yourself and vetoing the bill instead of sounding out the wishes of the people?" "I feel quite certain," Longacre continued, "that the majority of the people are in favor of the proposed legislation to liberalize these arbitrary Sunday laws, and that only a small minority are opposed to this bill. You know, Governor, the people in the other states of our Union have gone a long way toward liberalizing all their Sunday laws in recent years, either by a popular referendum or by legislative acts and state Supreme Court decisions. Perhaps you have heard, Governor, that the original Sunday laws in New England under Puritan rule would not allow husbands to kiss their wives on Sunday, and that some men were fined and put into the stocks for doing it. At this point, the governor interrupted and asked whether Elder Longacre was able to furnish him legal and historical proof that such things really happened. He told the governor that he would furnish him the Boston Ecclesiastical Court records, which contain 2 reports of such cases. A sea captain had gone to Europe, and when he returned to Boston Harbor one Sunday morning, after 3 years' absence, he embraced and kissed his wife, who was on the dock waiting for him. For this breach of the law, he was haled before the Boston Ecclesiastical Court, fined, and put in stocks. Another sea captain had been away only 3 months, and upon his return one Sunday morning, he kissed his wife, for which he was tried by the same court, fined, and placed in the stocks. Moreover, Longacre reminded the governor that in those days boys were fined 10 shillings for whistling on Sunday. Adults were fined 10 shillings for not going to church, whether they were members of the church or not. And young couples were fined for courting after sundown on Saturday nights. The Puritans of New England observed Sunday from sunset Saturday night to sunset Sunday night, in harmony with the scriptural way of observing the Sabbath day of the 4th commandment. Most states had liberalized these ancient drastic Sunday laws, he repeated, except Pennsylvania, which retained on its statute books a Sunday law modeled after that of Charles II of England. This law was enacted by the legislature at the request of the Scottish Presbyterian Church of Pennsylvania in 1794, and did not allow any recreation or diversion or labor or business on Sundays, but only works of mercy and actual necessity. Yet in spite of these laws, Sunday trains were operating for business, Sunday autos were running for pleasure, Sunday concerts were being held for commercial gain, Sunday golf and tennis were being played for amusement, but baseball and football were not permitted. The governor said that he had always stood for popular government and was opposed to dictatorial powers being exercised by public officials, and because of this, he was going to change his mind about vetoing the bill and would sign it and submit the issue to the people. That very day, Governor Pinchot signed the bill. When the news was made public in the papers the next morning, the clergymen who had secured the promise from the governor that he would veto the bill were voracious in denouncing him, declaring he had lied. But the governor reminded them of the proverb which states, "Wise men sometimes change their minds." Having championed popular government all his life, he could not consistently deny the people the privilege of expressing themselves on the subject of the repeal or retention of the Sunday laws. The Pittsburgh Press, in an editorial April 27, 1933, in replying to the critics of Governor Pinchot, said, In signing the Schwartz Bill, Governor Pinchot issued a statement that was a stinging rebuke to the small minority that heretofore had blocked amendment of the Blue Laws. The press continued by quoting the governor, quote, "In a state which has Sunday trains," this sounds like Longacre, Sunday concerts, Sunday golf, Sunday tennis, and a host of Sunday activities of many kinds, the possible addition of baseball and football will not seriously change the present picture. For years, anyone with money enough to play golf or tennis on Sunday morning or afternoon has been free to do so, law or no law. This unjust discrimination in favor of the rich and against the poor, which has thus existed, is one of my strongest reasons for signing this bill." End quote. It was heartening to discover during the hearings that there were a number of non-Adventist ministers who had sound and correct convictions on the subject of Sunday laws and religious liberty, and the courage to let these convictions be known in no uncertain terms. Outstanding among them was Herman Bielenberg, pastor of the Christ Evangelical Lutheran Church of Oil City, Pennsylvania, who said, "It seems to be the general impression here that the churches are unanimously supporting the Blue Laws. The public should be disillusioned and should hear that there are actually ministers, church members, and church bodies who have never supported the Sunday Blue Laws and are opposed to any manner of religious legislation. Neither I, nor my congregation, nor the church body to which I belong have at any time supported the Blue Laws and are opposed to any manner of religious legislation. I belong to the Synodical Conference of the Lutheran Church with a baptized membership of 1,424,264. I am definitely for the repeal of Blue Laws. They are unfair, unchristian, antiquated, intolerant, and unenforceable. I heartily disagree with the Lord's Day Alliance. It is a matter of individual conscience, whether a man wishes to observe Sunday or any other day. All Americans should be free to spend Sunday as they please, provided they do not interfere with their neighbor's rights. The man who wants to worship should be permitted to worship. The man who does not want to worship should be free to spend Sunday as he chooses. You cannot force a man to be religious by law. You cannot legislate a man into heaven. It is a basic error from a Christian or from an American standpoint to attempt this. I am heartily sick of attempts to force religious convictions on men who have none. Christ's method was one of persuasion and not coercion. Many good and honest citizens worship on Saturday. Why shouldn't they be free to do on Sunday what we do on Saturday? Surely, open stores, open movies, open ballparks, open gas stations will not interfere with Christian worship. What reason have Christians then to demand that these be closed? What apologies can they offer for unwarranted interference with other men's innocent pleasures? Repeal the blue laws. Give Americans their liberties to which they are entitled. Let's get away from bigotry which says, "Let my conscience be your guide." End quote. It was forceful testimonials like this that helped turn the tide in favor of repeal of the Sunday laws. That November, when the voters went to the polls, God gave a wonderful victory. The entire vote in Pennsylvania on the referendum was 1,546,619 in favor of 720,220 opposed, a margin of more than 2 to 1. End of that chapter. Just a minute, I'm going to do this, be a little more ready. Okay, in 1949, an evangelist held a religious crusade in Goldsboro, North Carolina. During the campaign, he appeared before the mayor of the city, accompanied by representatives of the local ministerial association, and urged that Sunday closing laws be enforced. The mayor, who had been a captain in the United States Army and who had been a careful reader of Liberty magazine, wrote asking Elder Longacre to come down and hold a mass meeting on the principles of religious liberty. He gladly consented and went to Goldsboro a few days before the meeting was to be held to arrange for the hall, the advertising, and other details. When the chairman of the local ministerial association saw the ads in the newspaper announcing the mass meeting, he wrote Longacre a letter demanding he go home. He said that Longacre had no business coming down to Goldsboro to tear down the laws of that community. He threatened that if he persisted and went on with his proposed lecture, a mob might take over and liquidate him. Oh dear. This letter did not scare Longacre. Through the years, he had met many similar threats, but he took it to the mayor and told him that it might be better if he went home. For should he continue with the meeting, it might only bring reproach to the cause of God, and he did not wish this to happen. That was his sole reason for canceling. I must have read that wrong. Let me go back. This letter did not scare him. Through the years, he had met many similar threats, but he took it to the mayor and told him that it might be better if he, i.e., Longacre, were to go home. I thought he meant if the mayor would go home. But if he, Longacre, would, it might be better for Longacre to go home, for should he continue with the meeting, it might only bring reproach to the cause of God, and he did not wish this to happen. That was his sole reason for suggesting the cancellation of the meeting. When the mayor heard his suggestion, he looked Longacre straight in the eye and said, "What kind of soldier are you? I'm going to be the chairman of that meeting. I'll take care of things." And with this assurance of the mayor's support, Longacre decided to stay. As he entered the auditorium the night of the mass meeting, a local Adventist handed him a note that read, "You'd better go out the back door. After the meeting, a large mob is waiting for you at the front to egg you." Just as soon as Longacre had the opportunity, he sent word to the ushers at the back of the auditorium to urge the members of the mob to come in. He told the ushers to tell them that they could be the judges, and if he said anything un-American or unchristian during his meeting, they could egg him as he left. But on the other hand, if he did not, they were to refrain from egging him and hold their peace. Upon hearing this, about half of the mob came marching in and found seats in the room. Before he got up to speak, the mayor introduced him as the editor of Liberty magazine and secretary of the Religious Liberty Association of Washington, D.C. He praised the magazine for its forthright stand on religious liberty and its championship of true Americanism. We have heard only one side of the question here. Dr. Longacre will give us the other side. He's a Seventh-day Adventist, a minister. Adventists will not fight in time of war. I know this from personal experience. I was a captain in the war, and I saw Seventh-day Adventist soldiers go over the top to bring the injured back when bullets were flying fast and thick. I think that Seventh-day Adventists are fine people. They are loyal to their country and to their God. Elder Longacre stood up and began speaking. In the audience, he saw the leaders of the Ministerial Association who had opposed him sitting in a group near the front. He also saw judges and many other officials and prominent people. Try as he might, he was not able to warm up the crowd and get them on his side, as he had on many similar occasions in other cities. They were as cold as an iceberg. Then he happened to recall a point in history that might be an entering wedge into their hearts and minds. The historical fact that North Carolina as a state had declared its independence of England in 1775 in a declaration signed at Mecklenburg 1 year before the Union Declaration was signed. He related in detail the story of this declaration and began quoting its signatories. As soon as he did this, many in the audience began to applaud. He knew he had the majority on his side. At the close of the lecture, he presented a resolution that he had previously drawn up, requesting the legislature to repeal all Sunday laws. He had just begun reading this resolution when the minister who had written him a threatening letter stood up and demanded that he be permitted to speak. "These are my people," he insisted, "and I want to talk to them." Do you know what Longacre said? He said, "This is my meeting, and I can't give you that privilege now, but after we have voted on this question, you can talk all night if the people want to listen to you that long." The mayor confirmed this statement. Then Longacre finished reading the resolution. The vote was taken, and almost the entire audience voted for repeal of Sunday laws. When the meeting was over, Elder Longacre said, "I have to go now to catch a train for Washington." So he picked up his briefcase and started to walk out. As he did this, the entire audience arose and left the opposing minister to speak to empty seats. That portion of the mob that had come in and heard his lecture met him just inside the front door and said, "Mr. Longacre, you are a Christian and a patriot. Come back real soon and give us some more of this stuff." They formed a bodyguard around him and led him through the mob waiting outside the door and insisted on accompanying him all the way to the station. As he rode homeward that night, he realized once again that the wrath of men had resulted in nothing but praise and honor to God. And I just want to stop there for a minute. You know, we think we're here in this room or that room or in church as an audience and sitting alone, but unseen to us. Ellen White in my last Sabbath school class told us that there are more unseen in those audiences than those that you can see. And so you're never alone, brothers and sisters. If you are called to give your witness before a legislature or court body, just remember that you can see maybe 50 people there in the audience chamber, but there are more unseen working. Satan's angels are included in that, but God's angels are there working to speak to the hearts of the people who are listening. If we will just work for God, God will work for us like he did for Longacre. But let's go on. Let's see. Some years ago, Sunday closing legislation flared, in Charleston, West Virginia. So severe were the restrictions that the sale of all Sunday newspapers and the operation of streetcars and autos were prohibited. The late James E. Schultz, prominent evangelist and author and pastor of the Charleston Seventh-day Adventist Church at that time, wrote an urgent request that Elder Longacre come to Charleston and hold a mass meeting opposing Sunday legislation. When he arrived at the theater that had been hired for the meeting, there was such a crowd around the building that he could not get in. There were 3 or 4 times as many people on the outside as on the inside. And translate that, brothers and sisters, to the unseen world. But going on. Seeing his predicament, the police came and cleared a path for him to get to the rostrum. That night, he spoke on religious liberty as it is based on love. The audience responded heartily. After the lecture, they begged him to come back to Charleston, an invitation he gladly accepted. A woman who was a millionaire was so interested in the subject that she paid all the expenses of the series of meetings. The cause of liberty was strengthened. At the conclusion of the series, Elder Schultz baptized 110 people. Thus again, the religious liberty work was an entering wedge into the hearts of men and women, bringing them into a complete knowledge of God's special truths for this time. For many years, Elder Longacre was closely connected with the development of the temperance work of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, promoting it through regular columns in Liberty magazine. Later, he headed the denomination's temperance committee and represented the temperance activities of the Adventist Church at the annual conventions of the Anti-Saloon League of America. On 3 occasions, he was made chairman of these national conventions, and it was thus that he had the privilege of introducing Governor Gifford Pinchot of Pennsylvania as the leading speaker. In addition to his work in connection with these conventions, he was called upon during the pre-Prohibition years to address numerous mass meetings in many states on the subject of temperance, with intensive campaigning for prohibition in Minnesota, Michigan, Ohio, Maine, Kansas, and Virginia. For some time, he was a member of the Flying Squadron, an organization composed of 7 men who went from place to place lecturing on temperance and prohibition. Each night for 7 nights, one of the group of 7 would lecture in a particular city. Meanwhile, the other 6 lecturers were speaking elsewhere. In this way, the 7 men followed one another in an intensive 7-night chain reaction series of lectures that helped to educate the masses in populous centers on the value of temperance and prohibition. William Jennings Bryan, we read about him a few times ago, the governors of Indiana and Tennessee, and other leaders of national importance comprised the group. Let me just back up. Do you mean to? I think he's saying that this flying squadron of 7 people included William Jennings Bryan, the governors of Indiana and Tennessee, and other leaders of national importance. And they followed them each other around in a circle until they each had spoken to each group. In 1931, Seventh-day Adventists organized their own temperance unit, naming it the American Temperance Society. Elder Longacre was appointed its first secretary and served for 8 years. Recently, under the vigorous leadership of W.A. Scharfenberg, the Society's work has spread until its influence has been felt in nearly every country. In Well Illustrated by Monthly Listen magazine, ably edited by Francis Soper, this magazine has wide circulation and is doing much to promote the cause of temperance. While Elder Longacre was holding a temperance mass meeting in St. Charles, Michigan, a city that boasted one saloon for each 200 inhabitants, his subject was, quote, the greatest menace in the present emergency, end quote. Near the close, he used an illustration that brought a tremendous response from the audience and greatly strengthened the cause of prohibition in that part of Michigan. He explained, I'm going to ask 4 American industries some questions as to the results obtained in transforming their raw materials, into finished products. I shall use these 4 chairs to illustrate these 4 industries. Listen to the questions and answers in this quiz, and I should do this. Addressing the first chair, he said, what is your name? And this absent chair is, my name, I am a sawmill. What is your raw material? Lumber. What? Oh no, logs. What is your finished product? Lumber. Is your finished product worth more than the raw material? Oh yes, much more. Are you a blessing or a curse to society? I am a great blessing to society. I give comfort, shelter, and homes to needy humanity. Then you are an honorable industry, and we will enact laws to protect your business. Addressing the second chair, he said, "What is your name?" "I am a grist mill." "What is your raw material?" "Wheat and corn." "What is your finished product?" "Flour and meal." "Is your finished product worth more than the raw material?" "Oh, yes, much more." "Are you a benefit to society or a curse?" "I'm a great benefit to society. I give health, vigor, strength, and comfort to society." "Then you are a respectable industry, and we shall enact laws to protect your business." To the third chair, he said, "What is your name?" "I am a paper mill." "What is your raw material?" "Old paper, wood, pulp, and rags." "What is your finished product?" "Fine paper." "Is your finished product worth more than the raw material?" "Much more, of course." "Are you a blessing or a curse to society?" "I am a great asset and benefit to society. Out of my finished product are made books, newspapers, magazines, diplomas, certificates, paper money, etc. I convey information and knowledge to all the world." "Then you are an honorable and respectable industry, and we shall make laws to protect your business." To the fourth chair, he said, "What is your name?" "I don't like to tell you my name." "Well, I do not like your smell. Tell me your name." I'm the gin mill, and I represent the distillery, the brewery, the saloon, and all the places where liquor is sold." "What is your raw material?" "Bright American boys and girls." "What is your finished product?" "Oh, I'm ashamed to tell of it. I don't like to tell. If you must know, it is the bum and the drunkard." "Is your finished product worth more than the raw material?" "No, it is worth far less, I'm sorry to say." "Are you a blessing or a curse to society?" "To be candid, I'm a burden, a disgrace, and a curse." "Then you are the only American industry whose finished product is worth less than the raw material." Elder Longacre turned to his audience for a decision on protective legislation. Shall we make a law to protect and preserve an industry that is a curse instead of a blessing to society? And the answer was a tremendous no. "Now," he continued, "let me use another illustration. We will add another chair to these four, making 5 links in a chain." It's almost time to quit. The top link represents the churchman. The second link, a wet legislator. The third link, a wet law. The fourth link, the saloon or liquor trade. And the fifth link, the drunkard, as the finished product. We shall ask the drunkard and this Christian voter some questions. Drunkard, what are you made of? Quickly go through this. "Out of a bright American boy capable of earning wages and being a credit to my home and country." "What are you worth now?" "Nothing. I'm a burden, a disgrace to my home, state, and country." "Drunkard, what made you what you are?" "The saloon over there made me." "Saloon, what made you?" "The wet law over there made me." "Law, what made you?" "The wet legislator over there made me." "Wet legislator, who made you?" "The ballot in the hands of the churchman over there made me." "Churchman, did you knowingly and conscientiously cast your ballot for the wet legislator and for the wet law that made the saloon and the drunkard? Well, I always stick to my party. That's not the question I asked. Did you vote for the wet legislator and the wet law that made the saloon and the drunkard? Yes, he represented my party and I never scratched the ticket. Then your politics prevents you from scratching the ticket no matter who runs for office? Yes. Now, said Elder Longacre to the audience, look at this chain of 5 links. The churchman, the wet legislator, the wet law, the saloon, and the drunkard. Let me ask you this last link. Let me ask you this last link in this chain. A few questions. Poor drunkard, where are you going? Certainly not to heaven. How do you know? Because God's good book says no drunkard shall enter the kingdom of heaven. Poor fellow, would to God I might save you. Let me go to the top of this chain, Elder Longacre said. Churchman, where are you going? I'm going to heaven. How do you know? About 40 years ago, the Lord took my feet out of the mire and clay and placed me on the solid rock and put a new song in my mouth. That's being a hypocrite, he said. And Elder Longacre turned again to the audience. Fellow citizens, listen to this statement. Even if you forget all the rest I have said, if that poor drunkard is shut out of heaven in the judgment day, as the good book says he will be, and if the unrepentant churchman who was an aider and abettor by knowingly and conscientiously or consciously voting for the wet legislator and the wet law that made the saloon and the drunkard goes to heaven, then the poor drunkard can stand up in the judgment day and look straight up into the face of God and cry, unjust, unjust, until the pillars of justice tremble. But just as sure as there is a God of justice sitting on the throne in the final judgment, he is going to hold every voter responsible for the proper exercise of his franchise. No one can escape that responsibility when the liquor traffic is slowly but surely transforming millions of bright American boys and girls into sordid drunkards. And that's where the quote ends. And we'll pick up what happens at the lecture later. So we'll stop there. We have a couple minutes. And yes, we need leaders like Longacre. Now today, I have to tell you, when I was reading how he approached temperance, I'm not sure people would buy that today, because everyone should have the freedom, quote unquote, according to the world, to drink or not to drink. And to legislate against it is like legislating, I don't know. But people might respond that way. But in his day, this was a big thing. Temperance was a big thing. Brian says corporate sins are sneaky. Pastor says it was nice, thank you. Alan said, Alan D, thank you. And that is right. That doesn't make it right if that's what you're saying. The church men invested votes in bad legislators. That's true. Okay. Anything else before we have closing prayer? Okay, let's have prayer to close our evening. I imagine most of you are on the East Coast, so it's probably dark where you're at. Let's have prayer. Father, we come to you tonight thankful for people who loved you and served you without deviating, without being fearful of the consequences, knowing that you were with them, such as Elder Longacre. Help us to have that knowledge also. Help us not to be afraid, to stand for the right because it's right, and not to consider any fudging or giving in. So give us that spine that keeps us straight in the face, standing straight in the face of adversity. Be with each one tonight, Lord. We're all going to rest sometime soon, and it maybe sooner, maybe now, or maybe later, but sometime this night we hope to lay down in peace and receive good rest from you. So give us safety through the night, comfort, bless each one, the burdens on their hearts, and give answers, we ask. We come to you, the God of all comfort, the God of all wisdom, asking you to guide each one of us, and may we gather together again as it works out for each next Monday evening. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.